What makes a good magic system? Is it its complexity, the way the magic is cast, how it is integrated into the broader world, or maybe how powerful it is? Magic systems in fantasy are one of those things that people constantly talk about, but they cannot really agree on what makes a good magic system. What are its properties? Should I make hard magic or should I make soft magic? Should I make it more obscure or should I make it ever present? In this video, I want to show you that no matter what is your magic system, there are still things that you should keep in mind if you want to create a really memorable and well fleshed out magic system. Make magic feel more magical. What I mean by that is to make it more mystical, more mysterious and arcane, that feels, well, more magical. An interesting way how to achieve it is to make magic more obscure and cast a shadow of mystery around it. Even in a high fantasy story, you can absolutely make it work. For example, by introducing more magical systems that are more mundane and are used for everyday activities, but there is this one magical system that is very powerful and forbidden, that is very mysterious and arcane. A great example of this is in Pyre. Pyre is a high fantasy story that is almost like a fairy tale. The entire premise of the setting is that two teams of sorcerers fight for the right for freedom using their magical powers in a divine rites that are performed under the light of a sacred star. What is very interesting is that the story don't really acknowledge their powers as being some kind of magic system, and more like their abilities to perform rites. We barely understand how those things works, but at the same time there are hard rules that cannot be broken. The aura of mysticism surrounding this magical system is really well fleshed out, even amongst this highly fantastical world. What I often see with fantasy writers is they try to quote-unquote scientify their magic system, making so many numbers and complex rules that it no longer feels like magic and more like a scientifical field. Star Wars is a great example where a mysterious cosmic force, which is called the Force, is presented as this very interesting alien mystical power, which contrasts quite heavily with the cold technology of the sci-fi universe. But then in the prequels they suck out the magic from it by introducing midichlorians, where they suddenly can measure someone's force in numbers by making a blood test with a medical device. Of course, do not go to the extreme of magic doing whatever, whenever, without any apparent cost, because this will very quickly kill the stakes in your story. Because if anything can happen at any time, what is the point of caring about anything? To make magic more impactful, you need to use it more sparingly, because if everything is magical, then nothing is. And by avoiding throwing magic everywhere, you'll actually make basic, simple spells feel far more impactful and special. They will feel odd and arcane because you didn't shower your audience with magic and fantasy all the time. And magic often suffers from a power scaling problem, but in a bit different way. You know how in anime there is a character that is powerful and then he meets another very powerful antagonist and then he defeats him by becoming more powerful and then he meets someone even more powerful, so he needs to become more powerful, and then you reach a cosmic level of power that is so extremely detached from our reality and imagination that we kinda lose the ability to immerse ourselves in. That often happens with magic in fantasy stories, although in a much smaller scale. And a great example of this is Game of Thrones. In the early seasons of Game of Thrones, most of the plot is around characters and politics. We barely get any signs of it being a fantasy story because of how little fantastical stuff is happening. But when those fantastical elements do appear, like the White Walkers or Melisandre conjuring a shadow assassin, it feels very impactful and supernatural because you are not showered with it all the time. What is really interesting is that if you actually remember that the early seasons of Game of Thrones were released at the same time when zombie movies and zombie TV shows were very popular, like The Walking Dead for example, and yet the White Walkers felt so dangerous and terrifying because the show restricted itself from showing it to us all the time. And then contrast that with later seasons, where magic and fantastical stuff keep happening in a very frequent basis, and the plot stop making any sense. Then when magic do appear, it doesn't really feel that special anymore. Another amazing example is Lord of the Rings. When you start watching it, there is no doubt that this is a fantasy story. We do see some magical stuff happening, but those are small cantrips and tricks mostly. Actual powerful spells are very rare. So when we finally reach the Mines of Moria, for example, and we see the iconic face-off between Gandalf and Balrog, we know that the Balrog is a huge, terrifying threat, and when Gandalf manages to defend from his attacks, we understand that he is a powerful wizard. And later on we see Gandalf using other spells, like scaring Nazguls with a beam of light. None of those spells are world-shattering. They are actually not really that powerful when you think about it, especially if you compare it to Dungeons & Dragons or other high fantasy media. And yet they feel very impactful because we don't see Gandalf going around throwing fireballs and lightning arcs all the time. What's interesting is that the main story is about an extremely powerful magical ring. And yet the power of the ring is always obfuscated and not that clear, and because of that it adds to the mysterious nature of the One Ring. Of course, I am not saying to make magic so obscure that it barely exists, especially that if in your story magic is the central element, then you can find other ways to make it feel more impactful and special. Like in Harry Potter, where magic is a central point of the story. You cannot make it obscure because if you remove magic from Harry Potter, then there is very little story. So you achieve it by adding dark arts and do things that are immoral and twisted and far more powerful than the casual magic. So just remember to restrain yourself when you throw magic into your story, because this will actually make it far more impactful than any galaxy-throwing spells could ever have. Do not chase uniqueness. Stop with the obsession of having the most unique or the best system ever. I see fantasy writers fall into this trap all the time. Unless your goal is to make a very memorable story, not because of your plot, of your characters, but because of your magic system, or maybe you want a big YouTuber influencer to make a half-an-hour video about your magic system, there is no point of doing that. The first question that I always ask myself, or other people that ask me for advice, is what is your goal? What do you want to achieve with it? Ask yourself, what is the purpose of this magic system in your story? What do you specifically want to do with it? And then develop it and integrate it into your world building. The most interesting scene in a story is when someone overcomes a limitation of their magic system with an incredibly creative way. And I always loved Avatar: The Last Airbender for this. The magic system there is very simple. You bend an element with the movement of your body. You need that element to be within a certain reach for you to use it. And that's pretty much all. But the characters in the show are very creative in the way on how they use it. They take this very simple magical system and create very interesting maneuvers and tricks and new creative way within the bounds of this system. And Avatar was really popular because of this. It was always interesting to watch to see how someone will get away from a particular situation using their limited toolset. Because of that, the world building was also greatly improved, because the society worked around the system. You can see that elemental bending had an impact on the everyday life. And that is what fundamentally magical system is in any story. It is a tool for your world building and storytelling to make new creative ways and explore new ideas. If you really like RPGs and fantasy, I am currently preparing for a big grand campaign on my Discord server, which you can find in the link down below. This RPG campaign is mostly a storytelling RPG campaign, so the systems and the mechanics are not that important as much as storytelling and the internal logic of the world is. Because what I usually do is I use RPGs as a tool set to improve my writing and my storytelling. And so if you really want to improve as a writer, meet new people, and decide the fate of a new colony, then the link to the Discord is down below. See you when I see you.